Morning. Today we are reading from the fourth book in the Left Behind series. It is Soul Harvest is the name of the book. We're reading chapter 3 and let's begin to read. Rayford could not swear to the credibility of Mac McCollum. All he knew was that the freckled, twice-divorced man had just turned 50 and had never had kids. He was a careful and able aviator with various types of aircraft, having flown both militarily and commercially. Mac had proved a friendly, interested listener, earthly in expression. They had not known each other long enough for Rayford to expect him to be more forthcoming. Though he seemed a bright and engaging guy, their limited relationship had involved only surface cordiality. Mac knew Rayford was a believer. Rayford hid that from no one, but Mac had never shown the slightest interest in the matter until now. Paramount in Rayford's mind was what not to say. Mac had finally expressed frustration over Carpathia, going so far as to allow that he was up to no good. But what if Mac was working for Carpathia as more than a pilot? What a way to entrap Rayford. Dare he both share his faith with Mac and reveal all that he and the tribulation force knew about Carpathia? And what of the bugging device built into the Condor 216? Even if Mac expressed an interest in Christ, Rayford would keep that volatile secret until he was sure Mac was not a fake. Mac turned off everything on the chopper except auxiliary power that kept the control panel lights and radio on. All Rayford could see across the expanse of inky desert was moon and stars. If he hadn't known better, he might have been persuaded that the little craft was drifting along on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean. Mac, Rayford said, tell me about the shelter. What does it look like? And how did Carpathia know he needed it? I don't know, Mac said. Maybe it was a security blanket in case one or more of his ambassadors turned on him again. It's deep, it's concrete, and it'll protect him from radiation. And I'll tell you one more thing. It's plenty big enough for the 216. Rayford was dumbfounded. The 216? I left that at the end of the long runway in New Babylon. And I was assigned to move it early this morning. Move it where? Didn't you ask me just the other day about that? New utility road Carpathia had built? That single lane thing that seemed to lead only to the fence at the edge of the airstrip? Yeah, well, now there's a gate in the fence where that road ends. So you open the gate, Rayford said, and you go where? Across desert sand, right? That's what it looks like, Max said. But a huge expanse of that sand has been treated with something. Wouldn't you think a craft as big as the 216 would sink in the sand if it ever got that far? You're telling me you taxied the 216 down that little utility road to a gate in the fence. How big must that gate be? Only big enough for the fuselage. The wings are higher than the fence. So you ferried the Condor off the airstrip and across the sand to where? 3.5 clicks northeast of headquarters, just like Carpathia said. So this shelter isn't a populated area. Nope, I doubt anyone's ever seen it without Carpathia's knowledge. It's huge, Ray, and it must have taken ages to build. I could have fit 2 aircraft that size in there and only half filled the space. It's about 30 feet below ground with plenty of supplies, plumbing, lodging, cooking areas, you name it. How does something underground withstand the shifting of the earth? Part genius, part luck, I guess, Max said. The whole thing floats, suspended on some sort of a membrane filled with hydraulic fluid and sitting on a platform of springs that serve as a mammoth shock absorbers. So the rest of New Babylon is in ruins, but the Condor and Carpathia's little hideout, or I should say big hideout, escaped damage. That's where the ingenious part comes in, Ray. The place was rocked pretty good. but the technology delivered. The one eventually they couldn't escape, even though they predicted it, was that the main entrance, the huge opening that allowed the plane to easily slip in there, was completely covered over with rock and sand by the quake. They were able to shelter a couple of other smaller openings on the other side to maintain passage, and Carpathia already has earth movers reopening the original entrance. They're working on it right now. So what? He's looking to go somewhere? Can't stand the heat? No, not at all. He's expecting company. His kings are on their way. He calls them ambassadors. He and Fortunato have big plans. Rayford shook his head. Fortunato. I saw him in Carpathia's office when the earthquake started. How'd he survive? I was as surprised as you, Ray. Unless I missed him, I didn't see him come out that door on the roof. I figured the only people with a prayer of surviving the collapse of that place were the few who were on the roof when the thing went down. That's more than a 60-foot drop with the concrete crashing all around you. So even that's a long shot. But I've heard stranger. I read about a guy in Korea who was on top of a hotel that collapsed, and he said he felt like he was surfing on a concrete slab until he hit the ground and rolled and wound up with a broken arm. So what's the story? How did Fortunato get out? You're not going to believe it. I'd believe anything at this point. Here's the story the way I saw it. I take Carpathia back to the shelter, and I put her down near the entrance where I had parked the Condor. It was totally covered over, like I say, so Carpathia directs me around to the side where there's a smaller opening. We go in and find a big staff of people working, almost as if nothing's happened. I mean, there's people cooking, cleaning, setting up, all that. Carpathia's secretary? Max shook his head. I guess she was killed in the building collapse along with most of the other headquarters staff. But he's got her and all the rest of them replaced already. Unbelievable. And Fortunato? He wasn't there either. Somebody tells Carpathia that there was no survivors at headquarters, and I swear, Ray, it looked to me like Carpathia paled. It was the first time I've ever seen him rattled, except when he pretends to go into a rage about something. I think those are all always planned. Me too. So what about Leon? Carpathia recovers real quick and says, we'll just see about that. He says he'll be right back, and I ask him, can I take him somewhere? He says no and leaves. When was the last time you saw him go anywhere by himself? Never. Bingo. He's gone about half an hour, and the next thing you know, he's back, and he's got Fortunato with him. Fortunato was covered with dust from his head to his feet, and his suit was a mess. But his shirt was tucked in and his coat buttoned up, tie straightened and everything. There wasn't a scratch on him. What was his story? It gave me chills, Ray. A bunch of people gathered around. I'd say about 100. Fortunato, real emotional, calls for order. Then he claims he went crying and screaming down in the rubble along with everybody else. He said halfway down he was wondering if it was possible to get lucky enough to be wedged in somewhere where he could breathe and still stay alive until rescuers might find him. He said he felt himself free falling and smacking into huge chunks of building. Then something caught his feet and flipped him so he was going straight down head first. When he hit, he said it felt and sounded like he cracked his head open. Then it was like the whole weight of the building came down on him. He felt his bones breaking and his lungs bursting and everything went black. He said it was like somebody pulled the plug on his life. He believes he died. And yet there he is wearing a dusty suit and not a scratch on him. I saw him with my own eyes, Ray. He claims he was lying there dead, not conscious of anything, no out-of-body experience or anything like that, just black nothingness, like the deepest sleep a person could ever have. He says he woke up, came back from the dead when he heard his name called. At first he thought he was dreaming, he said. He thought he was a little boy again and his mother was softly calling his name, trying to rouse him. But then he says he heard Nikolai's loud call, Leonardo, come forth. What? I'm telling you, Ray, it gave me the willies. I was never that religious, but I know that story from the Bible, and it sure sounded like Nikolai was pretending to be Jesus or something. You think the story's a lie? Rayford asked. You know, the Bible also says it's appointed unto man once to die. No second chances. I didn't know that, and I didn't know what to think when he told that story. Carpathia bringing somebody back from the dead. You know, at first I loved Carpathia and couldn't wait to work for him. There were times I thought he was a godly man, maybe some kind of deity himself, but it didn't add up. Him making me take off from the top of that building while people were hanging onto the struts and screaming for their lives. Him putting you down because you wanted to help that crash survivor on the desert. What kind of a God man is that? He's no God man, Rayford said. He's an anti-God man. You think he's the Antichrist, like some say? So there it was. Mac had put the question to him. Rayford knew he had been reckless. Had he now sealed his own fate? Had he revealed himself completely to one of Carpathia's own henchmen? Or was Mac sincere? How could he ever know for sure? Buck spun in a circle. Where was Chloe's car? She always parked it in the driveway in front of the garage that contained Loretta's junk. Loretta's own car was usually in the other stall. It wouldn't have made sense for Chloe to move her car into Loretta's stall just because Loretta had driven to the church. It could have been tossed anywhere, Tyson, Buck said. Yes, my friend, but not so far away that we could not see it. It could have been swallowed up. We should look, Cameron. If her car is here, we can assume she is here. Buck moved up and down the street, looking between wrecked houses and into great holes in the earth. Nothing resembling Chloe's car turned up anywhere. When he met Tyson back at what used to be Loretta's garage, the rabbi was trembling, though only in his middle 40s. Tyson suddenly looked old to Buck. He moved with a shaky gait and stumbled, dropping to his knees. Tyson, are you all right? Have you ever seen anything like it? Tyson said, his voice just above a whisper. I have seen devastation and waste, but this is overwhelming. Such widespread death and destruction. Buck put his hand on the man's shoulder and felt sobs rack his body. Tyson, we must not allow the enormity of all this to penetrate our minds. I know to somehow keep it separated from myself. I know it's not a dream. I know exactly what we're going through, but I can't dwell on it. I'm not equipped. If I allow it to overwhelm me, I'll be good to no one. We need each other. Let's be strong. Buck realized his own voice was weak as he pleaded with Tyson to be strong. Yes, Tyson said tearfully, trying to collect himself. The glory of the Lord must be our rear guard. We will rejoice in the Lord always, and he will lift us up. With that, Tyson rose and grabbed a shovel. Before Buck could catch up, Tyson began digging at the base of the garage. The helicopter's radio crackled to life, giving Rayford time to search himself, to think and silently pray that God would keep him from saying something stupid. He still didn't know whether Amanda was dead or alive. He didn't know whether Chloe or Buck or Tyson were still on earth or in heaven. Finding them, reuniting with them was his top priority. Was he now risking everything? The dispatcher at the shelter requested Max 1020. Mac glanced ruefully at Rayford. Better make it sound like we're in the air, he said, cranking the engines. The noise was deafening. Still work and rescue at Baghdad, he said. Be at least another hour. Roger that. Mac shut the chopper down. Bought us some time, he said. Rayford covered his eyes briefly. God, he prayed silently, all I can do is trust you and follow my instincts. I believe this man is sincere. If he's not, keep me from saying anything I shouldn't. If he is sincere, I don't want to keep from telling him what he needs to know. You've been so overt, so clear with Buck and Tyson. Couldn't you give me a sign? Anything that would assure me I'm doing the right thing? Rayford looked uncertainly into Mac's eyes, dimly illuminated by the glow from the control panel. For the moment, God seemed silent. He had not made a habit of speaking directly to Rayford, though Rayford had enjoyed his share of answers to prayer. There was no turning back now. While he sensed no divine green light, neither did he sense a red or even a yellow. Knowing the outcome could be a result of his own foolishness, he realized he had nothing to lose. Mac, I'm going to tell you my whole story and everything I feel about what's happened, about Nikolai and about what is to come. But before I do, I need you to tell me what Carpathia knows. If you know about whether Hattie or Amanda were really expected in Baghdad tonight. Mac sighed and looked away, and Rayford's heart fell. Clearly, he was about to hear something he'd rather not hear. Well, Ray, the truth is, Carpathia knows Hattie is still in the States. She got as far as Boston, but his sources tell him she boarded a nonstop to Denver before the earthquake hit. To Denver? I thought that's where she had come from. It was. That's where her family is. Nobody knows why she went back. Rayford's voice caught in his throat. And Amanda? Carpathia's people tell him she was on a Pan-Con heavy out of Boston that should have been on the ground in Baghdad before the quake hit. It had lost a little time over the Atlantic for some reason, but the last he knew, it was in Iraqi airspace. Rayford dropped his head and fought for composure. So it's underground somewhere, he said. Why wouldn't I have seen it at the airport? I don't know, Max said. Maybe it was completely swallowed by the desert, but all the other planes monitored by Baghdad Tower have been accounted for, so that doesn't seem likely. There's still hope then, Rayford said. Maybe that pilot was far enough behind schedule that he was still in the air and just stayed there until everything stopped moving and he could find a spot to put down. Maybe, Mac said, but Rayford detected flatness in his voice. Clearly, Mac was dubious. I won't stop looking until I know, Mac nodded, and Rayford sensed something more. Mac, what are you not telling me? Mac looked down and shook his head. Listen to me, Mac. I've already hinted what I think of Carpathia. That's a huge risk for me. I don't know where your true loyalties lie, and I'm about to tell you more than I should tell anyone that I wouldn't trust with my life. If you know something about Amanda that I need to know, you've got to tell me. Mac drew a hesitant breath. You really don't want to know. Trust me, you don't want to know. Is she dead? Probably, he said. I honestly don't know that, and I don't think Carpathia does either. But this is worse than that, Rayford. This is worse than her being dead. Getting into the garage at the wreckage of Loretta's home seemed impossible even for two grown men. It had been attached to the house and somehow appeared the least damaged. There was no basement under the garage area, thus not far for its cement slab and foundation to go. When the roof had fallen in, the section doors had been so heavily compressed that their panels had overlapped by several inches. One door was angled at least 2 feet off the track, pointing to the right. The other was off track about half that much and pointed in the other direction. There was no budging them. All Buck and Tyson could do was start hacking through them. In their normal state, the wood doors might easily have been cracked through, but now they sat with a huge section of roof and eaves jamming them awkwardly down to concrete, which rested 2 feet below the surface. To Buck, every whack at the wood with his axe felt as if he were crashing steel against steel. With both hands at the bottom of the handle and swinging with all his might, the best he could do was chip tiny pieces with each blow. This was a quality door made only more solid by the crush of nature. Buck was exhausted. Only nervous energy and grief held in check kept him going. With every swing of the axe, his desire grew to find Chloe. He knew the odds were against him, but he believed he could face her loss if he knew anything for sure. He went from hoping and praying that he would find her alive to that he would simply find her in a state that proved she died relatively painlessly. It wouldn't be long, he feared, before he would be praying that he finds her regardless. Tyson Ben Judah was in good shape for his age up until he had gone into hiding. He had worked out every day. He had told Buck that though he had never been an athlete, he knew that the health of his scholar's mind depended also on the health of his body. Tyson was keeping up his end of the task, wailing away at the door in various spots, testing for any weakness that would allow him to drive through it more quickly. He was panting and sweating, yet still he tried to talk while he worked. Cameron, you do not expect to find Chloe's car in here anyway, do you? No. And if you do not, from that you will conclude that she somehow escaped. That's my hope. So this is a process of elimination. That's right. As soon as we have established that her car is not here, Cameron, let us try to salvage whatever we can from the house. Like what? Foodstuffs, your clothes. Did you say you had already cleared your bedroom area? Yes, but I didn't see the closet or its contents. It can't be far. And the chest of drawers, surely you have clothes in there. Good idea, Buck said. Between the two axes and their resounding thwacks against the garage door, Buck heard something else. He stopped swinging and held up a hand to stop Tyson. The older man leaned on his axe to catch his breath, and Buck recognized the thump thump of helicopter blades. It grew so loud and close that Buck assumed it was 2 or 3 choppers. But when he caught sight of the craft, he was astounded to see it was just one, big as a bus. The only other he'd seen like it was in the Holy Land during an air attack years before. But this one, setting down just 100 or so yards away, resembled those old gray and black Israeli transport choppers, only in size. This was sparkling white and appeared to have just come off the assembly line. It carried the huge insignia of the global community. Do you believe this? Buck asked. What do you make of it? Tyson said. No idea. I just hope they're not looking for you. Frankly, Cameron, I think I have become a very low priority to the GC all of a sudden, don't you? We'll find out soon enough. Come on. They dropped their axes and crept back to the unturned pavement that had served as Loretta's street not that many hours before. Through a gouge in that fortress, they saw the GC copter settled next to the toppled utility pole. A high-tension wire snapped and crackled on the ground, while at least a dozen GC emergency workers piled out of the aircraft. The leader communicated on a walkie-talkie, and within seconds, power was cut to the area and the sparkling line fell dead. The leader directed a wire cutter to the SNP and the other lines that led to the power pole. 2 uniformed officers carried a large circular metal framework from the helicopter, and technicians quickly jury-rigged a connection that fastened it to one end of the now bare pole. Meanwhile, others used a massive earth drill to dig a new hole for the pole. A water tank and fast-setting concrete mixer dumped a solution in the hole, and a portable pulley was anchored on 4 sides by 2 officers, putting their entire weight on its metal feet at each corner. The rest maneuvered the quickly refashioned pole into position. It was drawn up to 45-degree angle, and 3 officers bent low to slide its bottom into the hole. The pulley tightened and straightened the pole, which dropped fast and deep, sending the excess concrete solution shooting up the sides of the pole. Within seconds, everything was reloaded into the helicopter, and the GC team lifted off. In fewer than 5 minutes, a utility pole that had been borne both electrical power and telephone lines had been transformed. Buck turned to Tyson. Do you realize what we just saw? Unbelievable, Tyson said. It is now a cell tower, is it not? It is. It's lower than it should be, but it will do the trick. Somebody believes that keeping the cell areas functioning is more important than electricity or telephone wires. Buck pulled his phone from his pocket. It showed full power and full range, at least in the shadow of that new tower. I wonder, he said, how long it will be before towers are up to allow us to call anywhere again. Tyson had started back toward the garage. Buck caught up with him. It cannot be long, Tyson said. Carpathia must have crews like this working around the clock all over the world. We better get heading back soon, Max said. Oh, sure, Rayford said. I'm going to let you take me back to Carpathia and his safe shelter before you tell me something about my own wife that I'll hate worse than knowing she's dead. Ray, please don't make me say any more. I said too much already. I can't corroborate any of this stuff, and I don't trust Carpathia. Just tell me, Rayford said. But if you respond the way I would, you won't want to talk about what I want to talk about. Rayford had nearly forgotten, and Mac was right. The prospect of bad news about his wife had made him obsess over it to the exclusion of anything else important enough to talk about. Mac, I give you my word, I'll answer any question you have and talk about anything you want, but you must tell me anything you know about Amanda. Mac still seemed reluctant. Well, for one thing, I do know that the Pancon Heavy would not have had enough fuel to go looking for somewhere else to land. If the quake happened before they touched down and it became obvious to the pilot he couldn't land at Baghdad, he would have had a whole lot farther to go. So that's good news, Mac. Since I didn't find the plane at Baghdad, it has to be somewhere relatively close by. I'll keep looking. Meanwhile, tell me what you know. All right, Ray, I don't guess we're at any point in history where it makes sense to play games. If this doesn't convince you I'm not one of Carpathia's spies, nothing will. If it gets back that I quoted him to you, I'm a dead man. So, regardless of what you think of this or how you react to it or what you might want to say to him about it, you can't ever let on. Understand? Yes, yes. Now what? Buck took a breath, Mac took a breath, but Mattingly said nothing. Rayford was about to explode. I got to get out of this cockpit, Mac said finally, unbuckling himself. Go on, Ray, get out. Don't make me climb over you. Mac was out of his seat and standing between his and Rayford's bent low to keep from knocking his head on the ceiling of the plexiglass bubble. Rayford unstrapped himself and popped the door open, jumping down in the sand. He was through begging. He simply determined he would not let Mac back in that chopper until he told him whatever it was he needed to know. Mac stood there, hands thrust deep into his pants pockets. Light from the full moon highlighted the reddish blonde hair, the craggy features, and the freckles on his weathered face. He looked like a man on his way to the gallows. Mac suddenly stepped forward and put both palms on the side of the chopper. His head hung low. Finally, he raised it and turned to face Rayford. All right, here it is. Don't forget you made me tell you. Carpathia talks about Amanda like he knows her. Rayford grimaced and held his hands out. Palms up, he shrugged. He does know her, so what? No, I mean he talks about her as if he really knows her. What's that supposed to mean? An affair? I know better than that. No, Ray, I'm saying he talks about her as if he's known her since before she knew you. Rayford nearly dropped in the sand. You're not saying. I'm telling you that behind closed doors, Carpathia makes comments about Amanda. She's a team player, he says. She's in the right place. She plays her role well. That kind of stuff. What am I supposed to make of that? Rayford could not speak. He didn't believe it. No, of course not. But the very idea, the gall of that man to make such an implication about the character of a woman Rayford knew so well. I hardly know your wife, Ray. I have no idea if it's possible. I'm just telling you what it's not possible, Rayford finally managed. I know you don't know her, but I do. I didn't expect you to believe it, Ray. I'm not even saying it makes me suspicious. You don't have to be suspicious. The man is a liar. He works for the father of lies. He would say anything about anybody to further his own agenda. I don't know why he needs to besmirch her reputation, but Ray, I told you I'm not saying I think he's right or anything, but you have to admit he's getting information from somewhere. Don't even suggest. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying. Mac, I can't say I've known Amanda long in the larger scheme of things. I can't say she bore me children like my first wife did. I can't say we've been together 20 years like I was with Irene. I can say, though, that we are not just husband and wife. We are brother and sister in Christ. If I had shared Irene's faith, she and I would have been true soulmates, too. But that was my fault. Amanda and I met after we had both become believers, and so we shared an almost instantaneous bond. It is a bond no one could break. That woman is no more a liar or a betrayer or a subversive or a turncoat than anyone. No one could be that good. No one could share my bed and hold my gaze and pledge her love and loyalty to me that earnestly and be a liar without my suspecting. No way. That's good enough for me, Cap, Mac said. Rayford was furious with Carpathia. If he had not pledged to maintain Mac's confidentiality, it would have been difficult to stop himself from jumping on the radio right then and demanding to talk directly to Nikolai. He wondered how he would face the man. What would he say or do when he saw him later? Why should I expect any different from a man like him, Rayford said. Good question, Mac said. Now we'd better get back, don't you think? Rayford wanted to tell Mac he was still willing to talk about the question he had raised. But he really didn't feel like talking anymore. If Mac raised it again, Rayford would follow through. But if Mac let him off the hook, he'd be grateful to wait for a better time. Mac, he said, as they strapped themselves into the chopper, since we're supposed to be on a rescue mission anyway, would you mind doing a 5-mile circle search. It'd sure be a lot easier during daylight, Max said. You want me to bring you back tomorrow? Yeah, but let's do a look right now. Anyway, if that plane went down anywhere near Baghdad, the only hope of finding survivors is to find them quick. Rayford saw sympathy on Mac's face. I know, Rayford said. I'm dreaming. But I can't run back to Carpathia and take advantage of shelter and supplies if I don't exhaust every effort to find Amanda. I was just wondering, Max said, if there was anything to Carpathia's claims. There's not, Mac, and I mean it. Now get off of that. I'm just saying, if there is, do you think there might be a chance that he would have had her on another plane, kept her safe somehow? Oh, I get it, Rayford said. The upside of my wife working for the enemy is that she might still be alive. I wasn't looking at it that way, Max said. What's the point then? No point. We don't have to talk about it anymore. We sure don't. But as Mac took the chopper in wider and wider concentric circles from the Baghdad terminal, all Rayford saw on the ground was shifting and sinking sand. Now he wanted to find Amanda, not just for himself, but also to prove that she was who he knew her to be. By the time they gave up the search and Mac promised the dispatcher they were finally on their way in, a sliver of doubt had crept into Rayford's mind. He felt guilty for entertaining it at all, but he could not shake it. He feared the damage that sliver could do in his love and reverence for this woman who had completed his life, and he was determined to eradicate it from his mind. His problem was that despite how romantic she had made him and how emotional he had waxed since his conversation and his exposure to more tragedy than anyone could ever endure, he still possessed the practical, analytical, scientific mind that made him the airman he was. He hated that he couldn't simply dismiss a doubt because it didn't fit what he felt in his heart. He would have to exonerate Amanda by somehow proving her loyalty and the genuineness of her faith. With her help, if she was alive, and without it, if she was dead. It was mid-afternoon when Buck and Tyson finally ripped a big enough hole in one of the garage doors to allow Tyson to crawl through. Tyson's voice was so hoarse and faint that Buck had to turn his ear toward the opening. Cameron, Chloe's car is here. I can get the door open just far enough to put the inside light on. It is empty except for her phone and computer. I'll meet you at the back of the house. Buck shouted, Hurry, Tyson. If her car's still here, she's still here. Buck scooped up as many of the tools as he could carry and raced to the back. This was the evidence he had hoped and prayed for. If Chloe was buried in that rubble and there was one chance in a million she was still alive, he would not rest. Buck attacked the wreckage with all his might, having to remind himself to breathe. Tyson appeared and picked up a shovel and an axe. Should I start in at some other location, he asked. No, we have to work together if we have any hope. And that's the end of chapter 3. Next, we'll be reading chapter 4. Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day.